Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here, really excited about today's show. The great artist Bryan Hitch joins us for a great conversation. First time he's ever been on Word Balloon, was knocked out when he commented on one of my podcasts and said, great job. I'm like, Bryan, come on the show. And he said, oh, thanks, love to. Never thought you'd ask. Never knew how to get a hold of him. My God, Bryan Hitch, are you kidding me? The Ultimates, Justice League, so many great runs in the 90s and in the 2000s, currently kicking ass on Hawkman. Unbelievable stuff, and I'm so excited to talk to him and share this conversation with you. I had no idea how much film work and television work from a storyboarding standpoint or a conceptual standpoint that Bryan did. But we talk about his work in, believe it or not, the Star Trek universe on the J.J. Abrams' first film. Also, the first season of Doctor Who with Chris Eccleston and Russell T. Davies. Really interesting stories. So, and just his thoughts on comics in general. And yeah, we go back, we talk about The Authority, we talk about Stormwatch, we talk about working with Mark Millar and Warren Ellis. It's great. How does Larry King say it? Bryan Hitch for the full hour. Well, it's more than an hour. It's almost 2 hours. I'm happy to share with you on today's Word Balloon. This episode of Word Balloon is sponsored by Aftershock Comics, shaking things up at your local comic shop right now with hit series like Animosity by Marguerite Bennett and Raphael De La Tour, Baby Teeth with Donny Cates and Gary Brown, and The Lollipop Kids, written by Adam and Aidan Glass and drawn by Diego Yapur. We'll be talking about Lollipop Kids in the middle break, but do yourself a favor. There are great books and unbelievable creators, high concepts, and truly, Aftershock has been cherry-picking some of the best writers and artists in comics to give us fresh concepts and create our own books. Check out what's rumbling there at AftershockComics.com. Word Balloon is also brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you very much, League, for your continued support via Patreon. It helps out. It helps me pay the bills, helps me keep the lights on, literally, and helps me get to the conventions as well. I hope you've enjoyed what I've been doing lately on Word Balloon. I've certainly been putting out more output, and that's because I've been getting great support from the League of Word Balloon listeners, and I have the time to do more than 4 episodes a month. So hopefully it's mutually beneficial to all of us. Do you like what you hear on Word Balloon? Do you like the conversations? I hope it adds to your comic culture experience. If you do, if you can spare the extra money and subscribe to Word Balloon, is it worth $1 a month? Is it worth $4 a month, the price of a comic book? If you've got the money and if you're so inclined, go to wordballoon.com, click on the Patreon ad, or go to patreon.com/wordballoon. Thank you as always for your support, League of Word Balloon listeners. All right, without further ado, let's get into this conversation with Bryan Hitch. He's doing wonderful work on Hawkman. Issue 4 came out. We're learning a lot about Hawkman's past lives, and apparently they weren't just Earthbound. He teases what's coming in the future of Hawkman as well in this conversation, not just encountering, of course, Khufu, Prince Khufu, his original Egyptian incarnation, but Qatar Hall of Thanagar has suddenly come, and very interesting stuff, and we'll talk about that. Plus, as I said, The Authority, The Ultimates, so many more great conversations and discussions with Bryan Hitch on today's Word Balloon. Bryan Hitch, finally, welcome to Word Balloon. As I was telling you before we started recording, it had been my ambition when I started Word Balloon that eventually I would talk to you and Mark Millar because I loved The Ultimates so much. And thankfully now, finally, I get the other half of the equation. So welcome.
Well, that's great. That's great. I'm happy to be on. I've been wanting to do it for ages.
Oh, that's really kind, man. And we were just talking off the air that you said you're celebrating an anniversary of sorts.
Well, it was just a realization that I moved into this, not the house I'm in right now, but there was a house I moved into in August of '98. And then I had to finish the last issue of Stormwatch that I was doing off. And then in September, I started drawing The Authority. I just realized, it's September 2018. It's literally the week 20 years ago I started drawing The Authority. Wow. So it was I kind of knew it was nearly 20 years anyway, because Warren and I had been talking about this last year when we got back together to do we did a 10-pager for the Wildstorm anniversary special, and it also went into the new edition of the Absolute Authority hardback slipcase edition that DC put out last year as well. And it was, Warren said it was fascinating for him because he hadn't kind of worked with that kind of material and that kind of storytelling pretty much since we'd done it. So for him, it was kind of getting into a different mindset. And for me, I realized that I haven't stopped doing it for 20 years, and maybe I should have been a little more diverse. So, but actually, it was quite poignant because we were, doing a story again. So it had Jenny Sparks in it because it was the classic authority from our run. And I love that group. I love that character. It took me no time at all just to kind of get back into the drawing them. They came back immediately. Though I had to look up what the engineer's costume looked like. I couldn't remember that one. And then I realized she was basically naked with a headdress. So it wasn't complicated. But I was saying to Warren, it said, when we did this back then, it was 19 years ago, when we did that, that originally it was literally considered to be at the forefront of modern superhero comics, and now doing this 10-page story 19 years later, it's suddenly a period piece, and it was quite odd to get that realization that maybe you can't go back, because if you want to stay modern, stay current, stay at the edge of stuff, you have to keep pressing forward on new things. You can't go back to old things you've done before, because chances are you'll never recapture it anyway, whatever made it work for the time, because this is all pop culture. It's always of the time. And even though I probably don't draw much differently than I did 20 years ago, the stuff that surrounds us when we create the work is different. And that was a 20th century piece. It's the 21st century now. It wasn't then.
Good point. Yes, absolutely. Well, and, I know Watchmen suffers from the same comparison at times. I mean, it's always given up as a classic, but it is always like, well, I don't, like, you'll read people say, yeah, I finally read Watchmen. I don't understand what the big deal is. And it's, again, contextually so different than everything else that was out there. And clearly the Authority was like that as well. And it's a book of its time. I got to ask, as you say about Jenny Sparks and stuff, was she inspired by anybody personally?
Not personally, but Warren, when he described it to me, and bear in mind this was '98, so it was the peak of this stuff. But he said, think of her like Kate Moss, but a Kate Moss who can act. So I he was looking for that kind of small-breasted, very small figure, the long hair, the kind of elfin thing. He didn't want the classic large breasts. Though actually, the first couple of issues, her breasts got smaller as the series went on, which isn't usual for comic books, especially in the 90s. So,
very true. I talked to Keith Giffen years ago about Power Girl, and when she was first in the Justice Society in the reboot of All Star Comics in the early 70s, and he was saying that out of defiance, he and now I'm blanking. Wally Wood. Yeah. We're making Power Girl's breasts larger as the because of her costume and because she was so buxom that in defiance they just kept making her bigger. And
the problem.
I'll laugh at that.
it's the problem when comics are created by men sitting in rooms on their own for too long.
Indeed.
That's the result.
That's a very good point. Absolutely, man. Well, I intend, obviously, in this conversation to go backwards and forwards because we will get to your excellent work on Hawkman. I'm really enjoying this series, and I think you and Robert are doing a tremendous job visually.
We're having a great time on it. Honestly, it's a lot of fun to watch, which really surprised me how much fun this was going to be to work on. So I'm happy to talk about it because I'm evangelical about how great fun this stuff is.
Well, then tell me, because I just kind of assumed, based on his costume, that it would be fun for an artist to kind of put their spin on Hawkman design. And not only if people haven't been reading the current costume, but part of the fun of the story is Hawkman is kind of working on, of course, an ancient mystery and encountering past incarnations of himself, not just Prince Khufu in the ancient Egypt, but as the cliffhanger of the most recent issue said, Qatar Hall of Thanagar.
Yeah, well, there's also Qatar Hall of Krypton as well. We're going to be meeting in detail in a later issue.
Wow,
so,
cool.
What we wanted to do, and when Robert, his moment of genius was that line, just saying he's been reincarnating across time and space. And, the idea just then something that we could encompass all this stuff and lots of stuff we hadn't seen before was just an excuse to go out there and have a really big, silly, fun time with all of this stuff, because one day it could be high concept science fiction, the next day it could be punching dinosaurs,
Yes.
literally, which is in fact what ended up happening. So, you say these things and suddenly they end up actually happening. And you think, I actually have to draw him punching a dinosaur. Okay. And I hadn't drawn dinosaurs before, so that was
Good
new.
Job. Yeah, this is great, man.
Well, this is part of the fun of it. There's a lot of stuff here that isn't what I'm used to doing. I've spent a lot of time destroying major cities. And that becomes a bit of a signature, and then suddenly you realize it's actually that signature is becoming a crutch because it's no longer impactful. And the real appeal came early on as Robert and I talked, and I realized actually this was actually going to be visually very different because there's going to be a lot of space in it. You needed to have space for the character to move because those wings are big, and that changes the way you think about scenes and the way you lay out the visuals. And Robert gives me a really very loose plot, has all the key beats in, all the key ideas, but he doesn't try to set it down too specifically to say this is what you should be drawing and this is how the scene runs. He said, here's the idea and here's are the beats I think we should try and hit. Here's a few ideas, but since this is a visual or action, just do what works. And that level of trust is pays off for me because I can dive into this stuff and be as big or as silly or as outrageous as I want to be with it. But always with the idea in mind that the character needs a lot of space to move, and that's not just being in the sky, but in other environments too. So, I mean, it may not come across that way when other people are reading it, but I think it's part of how you give the book a specific flavor visually that's different from, say, Superman or Batman. Because when you're drawing Batman, you're dealing with a different sense of environment and the way you use shadows and so on. Well, this book I'm using a lot more light, actually, and a lot less shadow than I would normally use, and a lot more background space around the character. So it's a different flavor, and each issue is very different too, because as I say, we've got Thanagar, which is high-tech science fiction, and we've got the issue before that, we've got him fighting dinosaurs. So it's a rapid cycle, bunch of concepts and fun visuals. So it doesn't get boring because it's not the same stuff. There's very few cities anywhere in this, let alone destroyed cities. So
it's amazing, man. And honestly, that was a great way to describe your storytelling style, because I started thinking about the Ultimates and the Authority and stuff. And I'm glad that Robert is giving you that kind of balance, as every partnership should be, in terms of how the storytelling is done. But yeah, I really do think it sounds. I mean, at least based on the work, did Miller and Warren also give you that kind of space when you guys were doing Authority and Ultimates?
Yeah, differently though. I mean, once Warren and I got into a groove, there were times he wouldn't bother giving me panel descriptions. He'd just give me the dialogue for the scene and say, and run that down beat by beat per panel, because there was no need to say the character, especially if it's a scene of them walking around and talking, or sitting and talking. There's no need for him to say on who and what angle to take. And even when writers put that stuff in, say, high angle, wide angle, it doesn't necessarily always feel that that's the way to do it when you sit down and work out the storytelling. And I'm entirely driven in my work by storytelling, not by this is something I'd really like to draw. I'm happy drawing anything. Never used to be, but now I am.
Interesting.
But it's what I draw is decided by the storytelling requirements, not by the fact that it's something that would be fun to draw or exciting to draw, interesting to draw. It's purely driven by the visuals are purely driven by the needs of the story. So Mark and I, once we got into, and bear in mind that Mark, when I started doing Ultimates with Mark, there wasn't any sort of sense of visual flavor. What basically Marvel wanted was us to do what we'd done on each on our Authority runs, and bring that to Marvel.
Interesting.
Because what Bill Gemma said was, if we'd done the Authority for Marvel, Warren and I, or Mark and Vin, Frank Quietly, if we'd done that at Marvel, it would have been a 200,000 bestseller, because it's exactly, they were looking at that what we were both doing on the book separately as being, kind of the leading edge of a modern voice in comics at the time. Young guys in our early 30s. And that's what they were looking for, but they wanted us to bring that essentially to the Avengers. And actually, when we first started talking about the Ultimates, we were talking about, and I'm sure I must have said this too many times in interviews, so it's probably boring for a lot of people, but when Mark and I first spoke, Mark called me and we ended up spending almost the entire day on the phone. And we talked about lots of the character stuff, and the idea of turning Captain America from a superhero into a super soldier for real, which hadn't been done at that point.
Yes.
And this was years before the Marvel movies, took all those approaches. So it was for the time kind of new thinking, or seemed to be anyway, or different thinking anyway, and. But we were still talking about doing things like, big Asgardian stories and time travel stories and things like that. And that was, like with Authority, just those big high concept stories, but with these characters. Then September the 11th happened, and it just completely changed the way the world worked and the way you saw the world. And suddenly it didn't seem like doing those high concept escapist stories felt right, because this is what I said earlier about what you do. It's not created in a vacuum. Even though it's pop culture and it's always of its time, because it's created in a time that's affected, and you're affected by things that go on around you, whether that's family life or public life or news or events or things in the world. Superheroes grew out of World War II as well, and
yes.
Prohibition and all of that stuff. And it was affected, Superman as an immigrant character is affected by the fact that he was created by immigrant people,
sure.
With that background. And with Ultimates, it just suddenly, I don't remember whether it was Mark that coined the phrase himself or whether it was something he'd heard on news or read in an article, but the phrase he used was super terrorism, not super villainy.
Yes.
And it changed the playing field completely. And suddenly we realized we weren't doing a superhero book, we were telling a war story. And that changed the flavor completely. It changed how we played it. It changed the nature of the reality with it, because with Authority, I was drawing at the time of September the 11th, I was drawing a short Authority story I'd written, and it was going to go into a special. It was a 10-page, which I think, if I remember right, it was called The Man with the Quantum Brain, but I'm not entirely sure about that. I could be misremembering it. But anyway, it opened with basically half of New York being destroyed.
Wow.
There's a big 3-page opening, and I was just drawing the big double-page spread of the lower half of Manhattan being destroyed in exquisite detail on September the 11th.
Wow.
And my inker at the time, Andrew Curry, was staying with me, and I had a friend visiting, and he was downstairs. We were up in the office working, and he was downstairs, and he just called us and came downstairs and saw what was happening. And we just sat there and watched this unfold, and I just put all the work away because I just knew there's no way we would finish that story, because it was no longer appropriate in the world that we now lived in. And that sort of escapism and that kind of destruction, we'd just seen it for real, and it isn't funny and it isn't exciting. And, the superheroes react to that level, those kind of events in the world in their pop culture. They always have. They have done throughout their history. At least, that's how I viewed it. So, that had a profound effect on how Mark and I chose to work the concept of Ultimates, or of Ultimate Avengers as it was originally going to be. And it was actually, I think, a much more interesting approach anyway. I know it was led by those terrible events, but it also just, it forced us into new directions with the characters, I think, that we wouldn't otherwise have gone. But it is very much of its time. I look at it now and I just see all the mistakes and all the things I'd do differently. I said to Mark, God, because Mark would send me a script for 22 pages, and I'd turn into 28-page issue.
Wow.
And Bill used to drive like Bill potty, but then it started selling really well. So it's like, okay, do what you like. Do you want extra pages for the hardcovers? You can have another 30 pages for the hardcovers.
Wow.
So you put new scenes in, which we were going to do, but then I was so bloody late on that book all the time that just I didn't want to take on any additional stuff, and I don't think they really wanted me to do it anyway. When Dan Buckley got into, he came in there starting to, try to corral Ultimates into something of a schedule, and he gave up after it was promises, it was cajoling, it was threats. In the end, as he said, I'm going to fold like a piece of cheap garden furniture. When you do it, we'll put it out, whatever. And it was a long 5 years doing that book.
But it was always worth the wait, man. Honestly,
I quit.
And again, we don't, we're all of us Wednesday Warriors, we're like, oh man, when's the next issue? But it was like, oh great, and it would come out, and you guys would pay off every time, man.
Well, thanks. I mean, I used to quit nearly every Friday. It was very frustrating. I'm not entirely there's a lot going on with me at the time that I think affected but I had more trouble actually being able to work than I did working. When I actually could sit down and focus, I was productive, but that was very seldom. On that, on Ultimate, on Authority, I was drawing 7 pages a week.
Wow.
I know. And on Ultimates, I was doing like 7 pages a month. It was a very often frustrating experience for no reason that I can actually fully define, I suppose. Mark created this myth that work that good should take a long time, which is the whole growing roses kind of thing, I suppose, and it kind of stuck. But it really wasn't true, because when I was drawing fast. It just, unfortunately, I wasn't drawing often. And that was the problem. I get into these cycles, which were very frustrating and depressing, and creativity and that stuff seems to go hand in hand sometimes.
Understood. Absolutely, man.
Yeah, but it certainly was an interesting time, certainly a growth time. But I just look at it now. I said to Mark, if we did that now, it would be a lot shorter. Because we'd keep. I don't think there was a single 22-page issue of Ultimates. I don't think anybody ever really realized they were getting 28, sometimes even 32-page issues when they came out. And we got to the end of Volume 1, and Dan said, Mark sent the script, and I sort of started reading the script, and it was about a 24-page script, and I said, you realize this is going to be a 38-page story when I finished with it. And so Dan said, how about we give you 48 pages, and we split it into 12 and 13, issues 12 and 13, two 24-page issues. I said, that's great. So I turned in a 38-page issue 9 and a 38-page issue 12 and a 48-page issue. I could just see Dan. There was a phrase they used to describe Dan going Red Hulk at the time, and I'm sure I must have sent Dan absolutely mental all the time with that stuff. But then, they were just as bad sometimes, because when we got to the second volume, and I said, there's this big sequence at the end, and I wanted to do a splash page, single splash, double page spread, and then I wanted to do a 3-page gatefold, just so he constantly got bigger. Mm-hmm. And Joe got back to me and said, no, don't do 3, do 8.
Wow.
And I was like, an 8-page spread. He said, yeah, because Jim Lee's just done a 6-page Batcave shot.
Competition. Absolutely.
I know, but the thing is, I was actually dreading it by the time I got to it. But it was actually the easiest thing I ever did on the Ultimates, that 8-page spread. I'd penciled it in 3 days, and that was 8 pages, and I couldn't even do that in a month before that. It was just something about it just kind of plopped into place. I still love that. I forget I drew that actually, so I go back and look at the Ultimates occasionally, and it's mad. You'd never get to do that today.
When the movie came out, and it's funny, we were talking off the air, and you said that your kids like going to the conventions now because they're into the TV shows and the movies and stuff. Did you pull out the Ultimates and go, hey, just so you know, if you're wondering where they got some of these ideas, right here, man?
No, it comes up occasionally on Twitter, actually, where some guy will pop onto my Twitter feed and ask me why I base the Ultimates so much on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Look at the dates, dude.
Absolutely, man.
I
No,
mean, there's like a 7-year difference.
yeah. Well, and forgive me because I always ask this question, and I almost am embarrassed to ask. But as a fan, we want you guys like rewarded for your work. I hope you got something for the movies.
Not really. You got, it's not something we ever really think about. That's the thing. It's work for hire.
Of course.
And you I don't think you can complain about it after the fact. If you want to change the work for hire deal, I'll be first in line to get that changed. But that just isn't the way it works, unfortunately. It used to be. Man. Well, you see, there's that thing where it says, all rights to all materials is owned universally and in perpetuity, and that was fine because, on the whole, for the enormous bulk of the comic book industry's lifetime, it's always just been about print because nothing ever got made into a movie, really, or a TV show, and certainly the comics were never mined for the material directly. So and that was fine because you got reprint rights, you got reprint royalties, you got payments, and that just sort of tickled through. So, but when it comes to a movie industry that's making tens of billions of dollars on the back of work initially created by a lot of very talented writers and artists, maybe that work for hire agreement should be kind of revised a little bit. But as Mark's always said, revenge is living well. So and he's certainly done that.
Well, that's true. I understand. Well, and you've had your forays into creator-owned comics as well. You and John Ross did your America's Got Talent kind of comic book, and then forgive me, what was your solo image book?
Real Heroes.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, though I still have to do the final issue of that.
Okay.
It got somewhat delayed by several years at DC Comics.
Understood. Yes.
There's actually 2 issues to be published. One is already done, but they're not going to put it out till the final issue's done, so they can put the 2 issues out and then get the trade out.
How many issues altogether then for
it's a 6-issue series. There's 4 published, 5 is complete but not yet published.
Understood.
And issue 6 is like 2/3 pencil, but not yet inked, colored, lettered, or anything. So I need to go back and just wrap that up so we can get that one off. And that one guy who keeps coming onto my Twitter feed asking me where the hell the final 2 issues of Real Heroes are, he will finally get an answer to his question. And I think he might be quite pleased. Whether he chooses to buy them or not, I don't know.
I hope that what I always hope with you guys is. You do your creator-owned stuff at your discretion and want, but also, it seems like you still have a lot to say with, certainly in the DC universe. My God, I mean, Justice League and now Hawkman. And it seems, as based on our conversation right now, that you're having fun still doing the licensed books. Wow.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think it's an either-or thing. I wish I was faster, that I had time to do. Well, actually, I am a lot faster now than I ever have been, and there is time to do more projects. But my plate's fairly full because I'm not just drawing Hawkman. Hawkman's what you're seeing published, but there's another book I'm already drawing that's not going to be out until next year because the writer I'm working with it has a fairly full plate, so he can't write monthly on this project. And I'm not going to say who it is because that's part of the excitement. It's pretty cool.
I understand, man. No. We never get ahead of marketing decisions. That's all right.
Exactly. But it was funny when we went to Dan with the project. I've never had a project green lit in 20 minutes before. It was and with no editorial input or interference, just like, yeah, do it. Off you go, the pair of you. When you're done, we'll publish it. So it was really good, and it's so unexpected for this writer to be doing this character, and it's a character I wanted to work on for a very, very long time. So and a world I wanted to play in for a very long time. So I'm having a hoot, and Kevin Nolan's inking the book for me.
Wow, great.
So as creative teams go, I couldn't be happier. This is lovely, and it's again effortless to draw because it works. This guy knows how to write, and he writes so well for artists. It's very, very easy to work on his material, and knowing Kevin's inking, it just takes any any kind of worry about line work or finish. You just want to turn it over to Kevin and let him do what he wants to do with it. But then, he inked the first issue and said that was the most fun I've ever had tracing lines. Because, I said, well, I wanted more of you. I was hoping you'd kind of, tart it up a bit, But he just wanted to do what I'd penciled. So, when we will meet in the middle as the issues go, maybe I should give him looser pencils. I keep threatening that. And he says, no, just you pencil it, So
I was going to ask, are you a tight penciler then?
Well, reasonably. I'm not, we've talked about printing from pencils from time to time, but I'm not that neat.
Okay.
Especially because I work a lot directly onto the paper without doing preliminary stuff. Not every page, because sometimes you have to work things out a little bit more carefully with the figures. But yeah, you can't really mistake what my intentions are. With Hawkman, sometimes it gets because the schedule is frankly insane. We have no lead time on the book at all.
Wow.
So when I started, issue 1 was literally done in 4 weeks, went to print the next week, and issue 2 and so on. And I've just been away for 2 weeks holiday, so I've come back to an issue which I have 2 weeks to draw. So yeah, well, I did issue one of the issues in that week at that time, and in fact, none of it's taking very long because the character itself lends itself, as I say, to this kind of space. And because I'm not ruling up hundreds of buildings and cities and stuff, it's actually, I'm finding it goes very, very quickly, and that's part of the fun of it, I guess, the energy in the project. But it's like the entire polar opposite of what the Ultimates was, which was entirely labor intensive. And this just isn't. It's. I've completely lost my train of thought. Was I actually starting this sentence?
Well, no, I was asking about how tight your pencils are, and yeah. So no, your answer. This is a good answer. Absolutely, man.
They're energetic. There's a little. The closest I can come to it, I suppose, is it's more. It's a little nearer to Neil Adams kind of penciling, where there's the side of the pencil, the point of the pencil. Some technical pencil stuff. I don't worry necessarily about making marks that have to be inked exactly as I've penciled them. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for a trace job with the inking. I'm looking for understanding. I mean, working with an inker is always a compromise for both of you because you both have different styles. Yet the inking lines are what are printed, not the pencil lines. So it's always when you're penciling, you're always thinking, how will this line be inked? But at the same time, you don't want to kind of lock up by second guessing yourself and starting to erase lines, thinking, no, that won't be inked right. That won't make any sense. So you want to be able to have a very easy relationship with your inker, and trusting relationship. And I worked with Paul Neary for the best part of 25 years. And that was a really profitable relationship, artistically anyway, for both of us. He's moved off to other stuff, and Andrew's inked my work on and off since the Ultimates because he inked the first 8 issues of Ultimates, I think.
Andrew Clark or Paul? When you're saying
Andrew Curry.
Andrew Curry. Pardon me.
Yeah, he inked the first half dozen 7 issues of Ultimates before Paul came on.
Okay. Yes, and obviously, like you started to say, you're both. They both helped you, at least for the first 3 issues. I see Paul's credit on issue 3.
Yeah,
and
Paul
you and Andrew for all 3 other issues. So
just the schedule. So
sure.
Neither of them particularly fast inkers, and Paul stepped in to help out because there's 3 pages we just couldn't fit into the schedule. And Paul's local, and Paul and Andrew are both local here, so
great.
It's very easy to drop stuff off. But it's ended up being that. It turns out I can ink really, really fast on my own stuff if I just sit down and focus on it. And so, I ended up inking 12 pages of issue 1 in something like 3 days to get that book out, and the same again on issue 2. I couldn't do it on 3 and 4. I did ink about 7 or 8 pages actually on issue 4, on issue 3, but I couldn't do anything on issue 4 because we had the holiday. So it's all a bit mad, the schedule, but I'm not stressed out by it because we're on top of it. As tight as the schedule is, we get the book done, it goes out, and there are still going to be pages I wished I could have had another day on or whatnot. But honestly, if I feel that badly about it, I'll do some a little bit of tarting up on them for the trades, for the hardcovers. And if I actually if I'm not actually not that bothered, I've moved on to other stuff by then. They'll go out as you saw them. But the pencils are tight. All the information's there. It's just that they're not so anally tight that you could print from them, because sometimes you're trying to figure things out. And I like to work, as where possible, directly on the paper without doing too much in the way of preliminaries. So it's also faster because it just removes the stage of process.
Okay.
So it's helping, because the choices I figured this out. It's only taken me, believe me, 30 years to figure this out. But I make the choices about what goes on the page and where it all goes on the page, how the storytelling works, how the panels are going to be constructed, and all the compositions. All of that happens, honestly, virtually instantaneously upon looking at a blank sheet of paper, and those decisions don't change whether I spend 2 hours drawing the page or 2 days drawing the page. It will still read and look pretty much exactly the same. So I began to realize that I was probably spending an awful lot of time, frankly, doing nothing or adding nothing to the page that anybody would see. And there were times when I was writing Justice League, I ended up drawing some of the issues. I was never supposed to draw any of them, but it was always on a ridiculously tight schedule because somebody had kind of dropped out. There was a 2-part story that I'd written for Garcia Lopez. He was going to draw it, which was going to be fantastic. And what happened is that, because they're on that mad twice monthly schedule, suddenly DC look at it and goes, hang on, there's 2 issues sitting there written. Why can't we publish those? Because that will stretch us out the 2 months. I said, because they're Garcia Lopez's, and it's going to take him 8 months to draw them with his other stuff. And they said, well, we want to publish them now. Well, who can we get? And I was like, crap. Well, if it can't be Garcia Lopez, the only other person I'm going to trust with this is me. So I said, okay, I'll draw them then. And I ended up having, I think I drew one in 2 weeks and the other in 6 days. And nobody noticed. And I thought, I've been doing this wrong for 30 years. So it just gave me a lot more confidence to work more directly and more focused and trust myself a lot more. And I got given this advice many times by other professionals over many, many years, and I've passed this on to others, younger guys, which is, learn to get out of your own way. You will honestly try to put every obstacle possible in front of you to not finish that page, or not get the job done, or not meet the deadline. It will be anything from what psychologists call seemingly inconsequential behavior, which is like, oh, you know what, I've forgotten to take the washing out the washing machine. I'll go and do that. Oh, I might as well walk the dog while the sun's out, And then you get home and you've done all this stuff. It's 4 PM, and you wonder where the fuck the day's gone, and actually, this might have been an open secret, but if you actually just sit down and don't go on Twitter and don't go on emails, and just sit down, put some headphones on, sit and focus, and just draw the damn page, it actually doesn't take very long.
Agreed. Thank you. Welcome to my life. Absolutely, man. And I think a lot of people, and truly, as we get older, it's not wisdom, it's perspective. And I think so. Maybe sometimes we do have to fuck up for 30 years and then go, well, maybe I should turn left instead. That might actually make more sense after turning right all these times for 30 years. So, man.
Yeah, I mean, there's been times where I've had productive periods. I mean, Authority was it was 12 issues on time by the same creative team from Wildstorm, which was a bit of a miracle in itself at the time. But then I came out of that book confident, and then I went on to JLA with Mark Waid, which was what I was really looking forward to, and then DC wanted us to do this big. Tabloid size special first, which was kind of an interesting challenge, because the idea of doing something truly visually big was really a fun thing.
Sure.
Though actually it took longer than everyone thought, because we were drawing the pages bigger, we were actually adding 25%. This is what I said about getting in your own way, but it took 25% longer to draw and to ink. So, and you weren't getting paid 25% more for doing them. So,
understood. Yeah.
There's one of those obstacles again. Obstacles to success. I have a long list. but we did that, and once we realised it was going to run over the schedule for when I would start JLA, DC. Well, Dan, the editor at the time, was supposed to alter the schedule to when I would start JLA, so that we would still be on that 3 to 5 month lead time. And he didn't. And by the time I got off Heaven's Ladder finished, we were 4 months behind on the regular book. And suddenly I started the story, but then I was being told, actually, the book's on the hot list now. We're going to have to get somebody else to draw the next issue or half of the third issue. And it was horrible. Yeah. Just absolutely horrible. And it just completely, broke me, because that wasn't what the experience was supposed to be. And the book was late, and it wasn't my fault, and of course it looks like I was late and it was my fault. But, so I went from the Authority, where I delivered everything bang on time, in fact, ahead of schedule, to JLA. And it was just a nightmare. It was just really, really unpleasant. And so, that's when, the call came. I quit JLA, sharpened a few pencils, and the phone rang, and Joe Quesada said, the lunatics are running the asylum. Do you want to join the party? And I mean, that's literally what he said to me.
I believe it.
So I was like, yep, I'm in. Because Mark had been wanting to, this is where I'm coming. I always get back to the point eventually. So Ultimates, when Mark called me that first day, we were talking about how it was working with different writers like Mark and Warren, and how they approach their material. So when Mark was writing the Ultimates, he was responding, because he and Grant had been looking at how Warren and I had been doing the Authority, and responding to that as well. So when Mark came to write the Ultimates, he was essentially writing for the stuff that he'd seen in the Authority. So he understood how I'd done what I'd done, and was able to give me a lot of space to that. But the difference between him and Warren, when Warren wrote a very complicated scene that seemed to be artistically demanding, needing a lot of rubble, buildings blowing up, that kind of stuff, he would then write a couple of scenes that were very low cost in terms of time spent drawing them. Mm-hmm. Mark had the opposite approach, which was to essentially tell you that every single page had to be the best page in the history of comics. And I've talked to, I've emailed, when Greg Capullo was doing the series with Mark last year, I emailed Greg and said, Mark sent me the, copies of the first issue. It's great. I said, how many times in the script did he ask for this to be the best page in the history of comics? He's like, oh my God, he does every fourth page. So, but he still does it. So Mark can be a little more costly in terms of what he asks for, but he doesn't ask for it like draw everything. He just, the way he describes it, you can't help but think of that. He's very, very good at pacing. He understands moments and structure really, really well. So again, that stuff, because it's all there, is very, very easy to deal with, because you don't actually, you can see it. It just fits together like clockwork, and when you read that, it's so easy to visualize how to draw it.
That's excellent, man. No, I love Mark's storytelling, both on the page and also in person. And literally, I think in the last 9 years, I've seen him 4 times in person. And he happened to come to Chicago for C2E2 this year, and we got to have dinner with a large group and share stories and stuff. And he kills me. And like we said earlier, man, I'm very happy for his success with the Netflix deal, and I'm glad that he's taking all the creators along. Did he offer you any sort of Miller World opportunity?
No, it never came up. He never asked for anything. So
okay.
I just assumed he hated my work.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. Okay, let's take a break here. We'll get back to our conversation with Bryan Hitch in just a second. But right now, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Aftershock Comics. I'm sure you've seen Aftershock titles on the racks of your favorite comic shops, a whole slew of fresh, high concepts written and drawn by your favorite creators. People like Garth Ennis and Russ Braun giving us Jimmy Bastards. Pestilence from Frank Thierry and Oleg Akunov, where the 14th century Black Plague from history is actually revealed as the first zombie outbreak. Or the early years of Vlad the Impaler in The Brothers Dracul from Cullen Bunn and Mirko Kolak. Those are just a few of the great titles. There's one that's coming up as far as an interview in the next couple weeks, and that is Lollipop Kids. It's by Adam and Adam Glass. It's drawn by Diego Yapur. When immigrants came to the New World, they didn't only bring their hopes and dreams, they also brought their monsters. Years ago, early settlers locked these monsters away in a secret prison deep in the woods of New Amsterdam, which of course became New York, so they'd never return to the old world again. These woods have since become Central Park, and now the monsters have escaped. It's a great concept and a very fun title from Aidan and Adam Glass. You know Adam from his wonderful television work on things like Supernatural and other great comics. Diego Yapur, a fantastic artist. Sal Cipriano is doing the lettering, and this is another great Aftershock project that deserves your attention. Aftershock books are available now. If you want to read about them more, you can check out original art pages and get full descriptions of some of these books as well, plus the diamond codes on these books to order them through your local shop. Do all that now by going to AftershockComics.com. All right, let's get back now to our conversation with Bryan Hitch on Word Balloon. You mentioned JLA, and I am sorry that run with Wade wasn't able to continue. But really, man, your solo JLA stuff was just fantastic. And
thanks.
Absolutely, man, and especially that initial story about, and I think it was the first story about Rao.
Yeah, that was. Earth. Well, at that point, this was long before Rebirth. There was we were going to run the two books, JLA and Justice League, and I'd been out for a big conference at DC. Couple of years, which is actually where I first met Robert Venditti when we first started talking about stuff. But at that, I was having dinner and Jeff and I got talking, and then, the plan, we started coming out with plans that we were going to do with our two books, with JLA and with Justice League, and how we were going to add some more people to the team, split the team, and start doing crossovers as well fairly regularly. We're going to cook up lots of plans for that, and then the ideas that we came up with in that conference ended up becoming eventually what became Rebirth. So it was those plans changed because then because it was going the twice monthly was what changed it. Jeff said I can't, with all the movie stuff, I can't do a twice monthly book. So he and Dan asked if I'd do it, and really I was kind of out of my depth on that because writing for other people was new. The schedule was already, we were already late because the first thing said, by the way, it said I need 2 first issues for 2 stories you haven't written yet.
Wow. Because
you have to start 2 artists at the same time. And
right.
So I had to write 2 first issues that could, and it was just more than I think. I hadn't got the experience necessary really to pull off. And by the time I started getting my head around the structure, everybody was always running late. The art was always behind. And so they were always asking for another chunk of issues we could give to another guy to pull in. And it turned into not what I wanted it to be, really. So, I mean, there was a couple of good stories. I really liked the Timeless story that Pisarin drew. He's fantastic. I mean, he's tremendous. And I really, really enjoyed the Legacy one with the JLA's kids. That was, if I'd stayed on the book, I had intended to stay on the book a bit longer. That was going to lead to something really huge. And they were going to stay around in the periphery of the story and come back into it. And the Aquaman character, because we couldn't use Aquaman, that bringing that future Aquaman in was kind of my way of getting Aquaman back into the book and having a different relationship with Mira, who was going to be on the team. So it was, and I wanted to play with that and have this broken character who had gone through so much trauma, and his family had rejected him, and his magical daughter had magically made sure all the seas in the world rejected him, and he's living with parts of Cyborg's old body keeping him alive.
Wow. And
that was going to be a great character to start playing with. I wanted to do the Dark Knight Aquaman basically with him. But I was building up to a really, really big finale I never in the end got to do. So I kind of had to put an ending onto the Legacy story that wasn't intended for it, unfortunately, which I only found out about before I read the final issue.
Oh man.
Yeah, it was schedules changed, things changed internally, stuff was happening internally that it just made more sense for me to step aside, really. And I wasn't enjoying the process as a whole as much as I wanted to. And as the editor said at the time, you've done all the JLA issues and you've drawn all those and you've done Justice League, and honestly, you talk about the Rouse story. And because I was on that schedule trying to write the 2 issues, and I ended up drawing some as well of Justice League.
Mm-hmm.
The final issue of the Rouse story just kept getting later and later, and in the end, I had to hand over a plot to be written by somebody else and drawn by somebody else. So, and I'd plotted the final issue of that story was going to be 38 pages, and it ended up being crammed into a 20-page finale.
Wow.
So I never got to end that story the way I wanted. So the whole thing had kind of grown into a bit of a frustrating mess for me. So but it happens. Sometimes
Sure.
that's the reality of the game. Some projects work really, really well and some don't. So I learned an awful lot about how not to do stuff, which is always very useful.
Understood.
As an experience. So, and I'm just working on an outline now for a series I want to be writing and drawing after Hawkman. Fingers crossed that'll go out, because that's going to be pretty epic if we get to pull that off. So,
Man, I hope so, man. And honestly, I appreciate what you're saying about the double shipping, because I really believe, and I haven't had this direct conversation with him in years, but just based on our conversations as we talked, I think that's what drove Ed Brubaker away from doing, DC or Marvel stuff, because it's like it's too demanding. And I appreciate, as a reader, it is nice. I mean, God, I went into the shop this week expecting to see a new either Superman or Action from Bendis.
yeah.
And they're like, oh, no, it's not till next week. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. Last week was a skip week. I assumed, that it's time for another issue or whatever, to the point where, you're almost expecting it as a reader. But what we don't realize is really the pressure on the creatives to get this stuff out. And it is a deadline medium. And I think that's what makes it an interesting medium, as much as it is demanding. But yeah, if it's, beyond, please.
I was going to say, I mean, I agree, but it was also massively, massively successful for DC. I mean,
Sure.
The whole Rebirth thing was a huge success, and it also benefited from the double shipping, which actually the double shipping also you didn't get. There's always an atrophy from a launch, a big launch. You always get the atrophy in numbers, and there's an expected curve which you expect all books to follow. And early on in Rebirth, they didn't follow that curve at all. So the double shipping kept the momentum high for a lot longer than it might otherwise have done.
Understood.
But
Absolutely.
but then you also, there's a trade-off, isn't there? Because you might get the same writer on all the issues, but you will never get the same art team on all the issues. You get art. And in our case, it was supposed to alternate between Tony Daniel and Passari. Tony didn't feel like he wanted to stay on after the first one. That's fair enough. And Passari was quick enough to certainly do far more, but they kept pulling him off to do other things. And then we get other artists on to do a few issues here and a few issues there. And but I'm glad that he drew as I say, Passari, I think, is an underrated genius. I think he's tremendously talented, and I would work with him again in a heartbeat. I'd love to write something for him, because he always gives you back far more than you ask for, and his drawing is impeccable. So, his work on the Timeless arc and the Legacy arc, I was really, really pleased with.
I'm going to have to revisit those, man. And again, I'm sorry that the ending of the Rouse story wasn't to your satisfaction, but I was really impressed with looking at Kryptonian mythology in a different way. And, for years, it really was just great row. That's all we really knew was Superman making the exclamation. And I really thought this was a great look at religion and how it would impact Earth, and this kind of super being seemingly coming and being able to cure all the world's ills pretty effortlessly. And Superman himself, skeptical and at the same time likely conflicted, facing this portion of his own heritage.
Yeah, that was certainly what I was trying to get across. I'm glad it did. Maybe I'm not as bad a writer as I thought I was. So yeah, those are themes that I grew up with, though. So I was brought up in a fairly strict Catholic, upbringing, and went to Catholic school. As a teen, I actually went to seminary to be a priest.
Wow.
But I always use it's a goofy line, but it's probably true, is that I discovered Superman was cooler than God, and so I went off and drew comics, which is pretty much how it happened.
How Lenin-esque of you.
I know. I mean, it's funny though, because I grew up in this small northern town, and it was the parish church there had a huge congregation, and it was lots of large families, and it was the sort of the tail end of the time when if a Catholic family had sort of several boys, one of them you could guarantee would be sent to seminary to be a priest because it was a job,
Sure.
and guaranteed employment. So there was all of that, and I think actually what attracted me to it was, as a young boy, was that I was ambitious and I wanted to be the guy in charge. So I think that's why I wanted to be the priest. I had to send to mass on Sundays. I thought, actually, I want to do his job up there because that'd be much more interesting than sitting down here. But it just when I went the seminary, I knew it wasn't for me when I went there. But I've always had this thing because I have this religious upbringing, and I don't have any belief in God or religions or anything like that. I don't have a problem with it. I don't want to convince anybody of my lack of belief any more than I want somebody else to convince me of their devout faith or belief. I'm all happy with them. We're all great with it. As long as we don't use it as an excuse to kill each other, that's great. But I didn't have the kind of faith my parents had or the belief. Now, one of my best friends is a Catholic priest. He's the dean of Lancaster Cathedral in northern England, and we've known each other for decades. Fortunately, he and I, religion's never got between us as a friendship. My lack of belief or his devout faith and belief, it's never been an issue with us. But I've had that kind of conflict in my early life, and that the idea that of embracing religion openly in literature, in work, for the small part it played in our interpretation of Thor in the Ultimates to the Rouse story. It's still there. There are other stories I want to tell that deal with aspects of faith and religion and so on too. And they'll happen in due course, but it's just an area that fascinates me, actually. I love, because I always loved the myths. I loved the legends. I loved the Greek myths and the Greek legends. I loved the Norse mythology. I followed that as much as I followed Catholicism as a kid. There was a kind of a eureka moment when I realized that once upon a time people believed in those gods just as much as we are taught to believe in this God. And they didn't think of it as fake mythology. It was just how the world worked.
Yes,
and again, that's what we were taught in school. We grew up, God existed, we were Catholics, it was all real. Everything that happened with Jesus was real, just exactly as it says in the Bible. But then there was another point, if I thought to myself, if all these mythologies can create these epics that we love to talk about and constantly retread, and Jack Kirby can do that with the Thor stuff, then it makes the magic and the mythology of the Judeo-Christian stuff just as appealing. For epic adventure and big scale stories. And it doesn't have to be something that insults a person's faith or religion, I don't think. But I think it provides us with an opportunity to explore another take on mythology, another take on religion. And religion is still a huge part of the world. It still impacts impacts events weekly, daily,
Yes,
hugely so. And I don't think we should shy away from that stuff.
I agree with you, and I can understand a publisher's worry of offending without even, certainly just when you announce, God, it happened again. We keep talking about Miller, American Jesus. He writes American Jesus, and everyone's like, what the fuck? And that's all they see is the title. And immediately, it's like, bring out the torches. All right, something's going wrong here. And yeah, man, no, it's tough. It's a tough tightrope, and I appreciate writers and artists like yourself that are willing to take on the challenge and show that, no, you can tell a really compelling religious story. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, I thought did an amazing job exploring faith. And that ran through the entire 7 seasons. And
I agree. I thought that was the best Star Trek show made, possibly until Discovery came out anyway. But
do you like Discovery?
I really do. I do. I mean, for all its flaws, and there are flaws, I really admire its ambition a lot. It's a hugely ambitious show. It's the best looking Star Trek show ever.
I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that.
I like the attempt at doing, a bigger scale, more in-depth story. I love that idea. And I love exploring the Star Trek universe like that.
I'm rooting for him, man. I was more disappointed than I mean, but again, I love Star Trek. The trailer for the second season looks great. I always feel like I have to apologize for my disappointment in Discovery because I just felt like the writing didn't. It just wasn't smart Star Trek like smart Star Trek usually is. I thought that's what was missing, man. Myself.
Yeah, you're probably right. There were times when it felt more Star Trek than others, definitely. But that trailer for season 2 is a lot of fun, and it looks like the show is going to be a lot of fun too. Suddenly, it's elevated, it's lifted. Everybody's comfortable with themselves now. They're not all hating each other for all the things they've done previously.
Agreed. Absolutely, and you're right. And hey, man, I always say, Mark Guggenheim, not to name drop the showrunner for Arrow, he's a huge Star Trek fan. I'm like, hey, it could be Star Trek Klingon latrine cleaning. And it's like, what time is it on? Let me know. Let me set my DVR, and I will be there to watch it. Absolutely, man.
It's like the people, and I say this currently wearing a Laurel and Hardy T-shirt, but it's either
boy, that's awesome. Go on.
Yeah, it's Laurel and Hardy or Charlie Chaplin. I mean, I appreciate Charlie Chaplin, but I love Laurel and Hardy.
Oh yeah.
And I can appreciate Star Wars, but there's something about Star Trek that just does it for me. I can't even tell you what it is because I enjoy the Star Wars movies, and I love the visual scope of the Star Wars movies. But Star Trek's always been a huge thing for me, and that's why it was such fun to work on that J.J. Abrams movie, because it was just one of those lifetime ambitions realized. So
I had no idea. Tell me about working on the J.J. Star Trek movie. That's amazing.
It was one of those again, and this is, I realized, a very common thread for me. One of those both joyful and frustrating experiences. What happened was they were writing the screenplay, and Damon Lindelof was involved, and it was involved as producer as well, with Alex Bob and JJ writing the screenplay. And I know Damon, and we'll meet up when we get the chance when we're in each other's towns, and keep in email touch. And he told me they were going to be doing, it was a big secret, JJ was going to be doing the movie, and I just said I would so really like to be involved in that. And so he mentioned it to JJ, and Bob and Alex knew the work, and JJ's producer Brian Burke knew my work, and they were like, yeah, let's get him in. So while they were writing the screenplay, they had a rough draft which they sent a copy over to London to read. I had to go to somebody's house in London and sit in one of their rooms and read the script under guard. And not be allowed to photograph. I had to surrender my phone and all this stuff. It's all very.
I believe it absolutely, man.
Anyway, so I read it, and it was very rough. It was nowhere near the movie you saw. Nero was still in it. There was much more about Spock and Kirk's childhood.
Oh wow!
In it, and it was all the key ideas were there, but it wasn't the film you saw by any means at that point. But Spock, there was the elder Spock was still in it, and that was the big secret they didn't want anybody to get out, was that Nimoy was coming in.
Cool.
They were writing it, hoping he would say yes. If he said no, they were going to have to do a hell of a rewrite. But they said we need a spaceship for Spock. So and I said, could you start on that now? Because there was no production design, there was no art department. They were still writing the screenplay. So I literally did a 20-minute sketch, first idea out my head, and emailed it over, and JJ was like, that's the coolest fucking spaceship I have ever seen. We're using that. And then everybody said, well, maybe we should do a few more passes. So I did about another 10 sketches, and Jay said, no, I'm sticking with the first one. That's great. That's it. And a friend of mine, Neil Bushnell, who's an English guy who does computer CGI work. He's actually an author now anyway, but back then he was doing CG work. And he created a turnaround and moving model for me to show, because I wanted to show how it could twist and turn and move.
Yes.
Yeah. And so everybody was quite happy with that. And then there was up and downs about whether it was going to be green. They had to do another draft months. And my wife and I were talking about having another baby. And the idea was that, they'd get a green light and I would go to LA for a few months and work on the movie and work on the designs and stuff with them, which is all very exciting. And so we toyed with this idea of having another baby up and down for a while, and they said, look, they Paramount was so back and forth on whether they're going to greenlight it and whether the movie's even going to get made. The chances of them coinciding are so minimal. Let's just try and have the baby, and we were very successful almost instantaneously. In fact, suddenly that day we were pregnant, and then Ted was born, and the day Ted was born, we got the green light. So I couldn't actually go over to LA to work fully on the movie as planned.
Sure.
And so JJ said, "Well, just do it from home. Just work from home. Do what you can, and we'll." And we'd had conversations on the phone. In fact, the first conversation I had, I was trying to talk about how to get scale, which is something you never really got in the TV shows, because the ship basically floated left to right all the time. Like it was sailing on the ocean, and the camera would always pass either close to the ship or between the nacelle and the ship in a way that made you think that either it's an enormous camera or it's a very small ship. I just thought the scale was always off. So I tried to describe this scene to JJ about how you needed to get really close to the ship, so close that you can virtually touch the portholes. Then it pulls out and you get a sense of perspective on the ship. And you get the ship then fills the screen, and then it goes off into the distance, and it's suddenly tiny again. It's the vast expanse of space. Now you know how big space is because you've been that close to a ship. You know how big the ship is, and when you see that ship, and then suddenly Nero's ship appears opposite it, you know just how vast Nero's ship is. So I described this scene on the phone. It wasn't in the script or anything. So imagine my surprise when we went to see the film, and that's the opening 3 minutes of the movie. So. Because what happened was, I'm back at home and I'm doing the design work, or about to, and the production designer calls me, Scott Shambliss calls me, and his first words, which didn't bode well for me, were, "I've been told I have to work with you." Okay. So it sort of went downhill from there, and in the end, it just wasn't worth. And he clearly wasn't using or looking at any of the stuff I was submitting at that point. So. So I never got to do the Enterprises, which was the real goal. Spock's ship was great. So I drifted off the movie, and I went to see. I didn't go to the premiere. They invited me over to LA for the premiere. I didn't want to go because I felt like, well, what's the point? I suppose the point was a free trip to LA to see a Star Trek movie. There's the follies of youth, There's that perspective you were talking about. And nor did I go to the London premiere when they came over for that. So I went to see it at the local cinema with Andrew Curry. And Andrew had been in my office all the time when I'd been, because we were sharing a studio. He was in my office all the time. I was talking on the phone. He'd seen all the stuff that I'd done while I was writing the script. He'd heard all my ideas. He was a sounding board when I had. So everything from every idea that I had for the film that expressed, he knew about, including what I just described about the scale stuff. So we're sitting there watching the movie, and I'd been told by the art director that the production designer that nothing of my designs really stayed in it, and they completely changed Spock's ship. So fair enough, that's movies for you, I guess. So I was absolutely floored when I saw the movie, and that it was just everything we all wanted it to be. Visually, it was everything we'd been describing while I were making the script, and Spock's ship is exactly as I. I mean, there was a lot more detail to it, obviously, because I'd only at that point done a fairly loose sketch, but it was still the same ship.
Oh, that's
and
great.
It still moved the same way. And Damon Lindelof later said every single idea I had was in the movies, from the view screens being windows and all that stuff to how the 60s retro stuff could be actually made to look ultra cool and modern. And it was very exciting to see that, and I still love that I've had that kind of impact. That even on Discovery, they're still having the view screen windows.
Yes.
And there's little details that I noticed too that are kind of followed through as now being accepted as standard Star Trek stuff. So it's been great fun to have worked on Doctor Who and had an impact on both things, even if in the main, especially on Star Trek, it was entirely uncredited and unknown by the general public. but
That's awesome.
it's still nice to have done
Oh
it.
God.
You know,
Yeah, man.
as you said, you know, I'm with you on the Klingon latrine cleaning stuff. I would watch that shit, literally.
I hear you, man. No, exactly. I don't know what kind of budget IDW has, but it sounds like you need to talk to them about doing a Star Trek comic at some point. I don't
You
know
know,
if you want to.
well, I have had a couple of goes at it from time to time, but it's not the same. It honestly isn't the same because it's just you're drawing representations of actors, and it's
I hear you. Sure.
it's not, and it's honestly it just doesn't click in the same way as.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
mean, the fun thing about that was being able to go into something where JJ's saying, "Look, we're remaking the original series. Everything's up for grabs. How do we make that original series modern, cool, interesting, fun, big?
Sure.
You know, and the same with Doctor Who is when you're taking something that's older and trying to bring it to life for a modern audience visually, doing something that they haven't done before. That's the exciting stuff. The day-to-day stuff isn't as exciting as just being able to design the TARDIS and then go and stand out and walk around it. You know, that was great. You know, that's interesting. But having to do day-to-day work on kind of drawing Cisco's likenesses or Shatner's likeness or that kind of stuff, it wouldn't appeal to me in the same way because I don't think I can draw likenesses, but it's not something I enjoy doing as much anyway.
I respect that. No, I totally understand that. Am I taxing you with time? Because I know it's like 11:20 your time, and I don't want to keep you up. But if you're cool, then yeah, I don't mind. Because man, you've opened up another door to walk through, and that's Doctor Who. Because that's the thing, Brian. I do forget about your contributions to TV and film and stuff. So yeah, when did you work on Doctor Who? What period?
It was the beginning. It was when Russell Davies. Yeah. That was my thing. What happened was. I was friends with the guys who do SFX magazine over here.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I am pleased to say Word Balloon has been in SFX magazine.
Excellent.
And it blew my mind that I was in SFX magazine, that they knew who I was.
So yeah, there's a guy who's been writing for them for donkey's years called Nick Setchfield, and you know we're friends. We keep in touch, and you know he emailed me to say I've just heard they've cast Eccleston. You know, and I was like, that's great.
Absolutely.
Said to him, "Can I have Russell's email address by any chance?" I said, "This is shit I've got to get into." So normally they wouldn't do it, but he gave it to me without actually asking Russell, which is probably a bit naughty. But anyway, so I wrote Russell this email. I said, "Look, you don't know who I am. You're not going to know who I am at all. But I've done this comic and this comic and this comic, and I'm a massive Doctor Who fan. I grew up with this stuff. If there's any possibility I could come in and contribute to the show, that would be great. But obviously, you know, I understand that you don't know who the fuck I am. But if you wanted to kind of look me up, you know. Anyway, with 2 minutes later, I get this email back saying, "Oh my God, you're the Bryan Hitch." You know, it's like, I love your work. I've known you for ages. Of course you can come on the show. Come and meet us tomorrow. So, you know, it's like, okay, well, that wasn't expected. So I went into, and this again, it was one of those lovely periods where it's just, at that point there was just Russell Davies, and the BBC producer Julie Gardner.
Okay.
And again, they just hired Ed Thomas as production designer, who was lovely, and we got on great from the start. Mostly because I said I don't want your job. You know, I'm just here as kind of a. I suppose they never tried to make a show like American shows and movies where they have production designers for the whole show. Previously on Doctor Who, each one of those stories in each of the seasons would have a different production designer, different producer, different design, because they worked in little units. So each kind of serial, because they were serials, like there were 4-part stories at 20 minutes long. So they often had a whole team of production designers. So they'd never tried to make an American style 42-minute or hour-long as it is with the adverts. American style drama, and that's what they wanted this to appeal to. Because at one of the earliest full production meetings, Russell put everything Galactica and Buffy and all these big American shows, and they said, "This is what we have to do, and we have a 10th of the budget because it's the BBC." You know,
of course, yes.
So, but then again, in the earliest days, it was just Ed Thomas would drive up from Wales to my place, and we'd pull out books and architecture stuff, and we'd talk about ideas that would feed back into meetings and stuff. When it was again just the small group of us, just Russell, the BBC producer, Ed, and me, and that's always the most fun, is when you're coming at it with nothing. Because Russell's saying in one meeting, should we even have an inside of the TARDIS? Do we need to see it? Because he only really gets him from one story to another. Do we need the TARDIS set? Because it's going to be hideously expensive. In the end, we thought we'd do it, and then I designed the basic setup for the TARDIS, and they had £13,000 to build the TARDIS set with, and they budgeted the build cost at £250,000. So they were kind of off on their estimations in terms of what they could do. So they never got to build the whole thing. It was only ever built 2/3 of it was built. It was supposed to be a fully enclosed set, and they only ever built 2/3 of it because that's all they could afford. And then it was supposed to be originally pretty much the structure of Capaldi's TARDIS, the 3 levels: the mezzanine level, the middle level, and the underneath bit. Okay. And it was that, and the door was supposed to be on the middle level. That's exactly the structure you see on Capaldi's. So imagine Capaldi's TARDIS structure, but with those big flying buttresses of mine from Eccleston's TARDIS and David Tennant's TARDIS. So that was what it was supposed to look like, and the BBC hired a studio space outside of Cardiff to build it, and they hired, because they said they had the height for the TARDIS build, and they had the height of this warehouse as being tall enough to hold the TARDIS set. And then after they'd hired the space, signed all the contracts, the production designer finally went to have a look at the studio space to see where they were going to start laying out all the constructions. And they, instead of hiring a structure with a flat roof that's equal height, they'd hired one which has sloping roofs on 2 sides, and only the middle section itself has the height that's big enough for the TARDIS set. But also that's where they put all the structures that are holding up the roof, all the the great tall beams that hold up the roof. So in fact, we had to reduce the TARDIS. We had to move it out to the center of the studio and into the side, which is actually only big enough for 1 story rather than a 3-story set. So we had to cut out. They were originally going to cut it out completely and just have the console be on the floor. And I pushed to kind of keep that, even though there's no room underneath it, I did push to keep that central section elevated slightly off the floor. And the mezzanine doesn't really exist. There's a couple of like very small, if you actually look at that TARDIS, there's a couple of kind of small balconies you can't get to that wouldn't fit anybody on it. Just stuck up there on the side, because it's all that was left of the concept by the time they'd reduced the set to a single story. It still worked on the whole, but it was nowhere near quite the scope we'd all imagined it to be. But it was that honestly the greatest lark alive was to walk around something like that once you've been working on the design of it and it's all on paper, and then just to stand on it and see it made real was just the biggest thrill. So I'm standing on the set, the day before Eccleston's due to film, and it hasn't been finished. We've spent the morning gaffer taping all sorts of odds and ends onto the console because it wasn't finished. In fact, when they first, I think they've changed it for later editions, but when they first broadcast it, the first time you see Eccleston standing on the TARDIS set when Rose goes in, there's no lighting inside the TARDIS because they hadn't even fitted the lights when they shot that scene. And then so he filmed that, went off to do something, and they hastily put some lights in. So when he comes back and does the second part of the scene, they've got some lighting it. So it was bizarre at first because one part of the scene is lit, the next part isn't. So Russell says to me, "So you've designed the TARDIS. Here it is. What's next?" I said, "Bridge of the Enterprise." So he said, "Do you think you'll ever get to do it?" I said, "Probably not a chance in hell, but you never know." And then the year later, or a year or two later, this the Star Trek movie came up, and although I didn't get to do the Bridge of the Enterprise, I walk around on it. I came damn close. So
absolutely, man. And I loved with Spock's ship that gyroscope motion
Yeah.
To propel it and everything was really an interesting design. Do you need water, Brian? I don't want to
No, it's I've got some. I'm drinking as we talk.
Okay. No, I totally, because believe me, I sometimes I love these in-depth conversations. I always appreciate it, but by the same token, I try to watch out for my guys. And it's like, hey, if you need a second, no problem,
When I'm gasping and my voice breaks completely, you can let me go. I can talk till then.
Were there other films and TV things that of note that or even of not of note, but just enjoyable things that you've worked on?
Yeah, some stuff's come up that hasn't come up across, and even though it was uncredited, I was, but I probably shouldn't admit to it. I was heavily involved in the Fantastic Four movie with Josh Trank.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I was involved. Really early on when it was Josh and Jeremy Slater was the writer and me, and that was it. And so, and at least initially there was a lot of story conversations as well as design conversations, and the film kept moving. There was a point when we had to present something to the powers that be at Fox, or at least Josh had to anyway, and the producers had to. And we all felt we had a really good Fantastic Four movie then. The story was pretty strong. I mean, the final acts always need work, but, the final act was the weakest bit. It was strong. It was strong on character. There was a lot of humor in the character stuff. It really reminded me, Slater's script by that point really reminded me a lot of great Spielberg 80s movies, Okay. I mean, it really had that vibe to it. And it was big and high concept, and it just felt like it's going to be a lot of fun. But the only note that came back from I think, what's her name? Was it Emily Watson? Anyway, she was the head.
Go on. Oh no, yeah. She's the head of Fox production or whatever.
Yeah. She basically said, and I've heard this. I didn't hear this directly from her. I heard this from Josh, but she basically said, "That's a Marvel movie. I don't want a Marvel movie." And that kind of derailed things a little bit.
Sure.
I know we plugged away at it, and Josh then wanted to go and do something a bit more indie vibe and a bit more low tech. I mean, actually, some of the design stuff that would have been fun was like the quantum gate they built was a much bigger thing, much more like something the size of CERN. It was huge. Initially, and that was what they were going to go into the negative zone with, and Annihilus was going to be the lead villain, not Doctor Doom. Victor was going to become Doctor Doom by the end of the movie, but he wasn't going to be the villain. So Annihilus, so I designed the Annihilus for it, and I designed this huge quantum gate, like a vast particle accelerator, and their pod was going to be inserted. This was in the ceiling of the building, and pod was going to be inserted upwards into it, like a hole in the roof, on this huge arm that Johnny controlled from a PS4 controller, because he couldn't handle Reed's tech, and Reed was going to kind of basically in this cute little scene, Johnny has all these controls, but he can't figure out how to fly it. So in a quick cut scene, Reed kind of reduces all these wires to less wires, to fewer controls, and then eventually gives him everything all wired up to a PS4 controller, which he flies. And what they'd done was that they'd stolen one of the Apollo capsules from the Smithsonian, and that's what they were going to go to the negative zone in. And it was kind of a little bit of heist to get that out of the Smithsonian, which is kind of a thing. And then they steal that in order to, because this wasn't a government funding, this was like a real kind of backroom mission. So to get this, instead of building their own capsule, they stole one of the lunar landing ones, and all this stuff just kind of started disappearing as it went more and more low tech and more indie. I wasn't there for any of the shoot. My last involvement with the movie was Josh got me out to Baton Rouge, where they were shooting just about 5 weeks before they were due to start filming, and basically said we can't come up with the action for. Can you do it? So I said, well, what do you mean, draw it? He said, no, come up with it. So
can you repeat that, Brian? Because you dropped out for a second. So
sorry.
They couldn't come up to what? They hadn't come up with basically the action for the final act. The big action set piece. They didn't know what it should be or could be. They just knew it was going to be them against Victor in the negative zone. So
I basically wrote, and not dialogue. I just basically wrote a structure for how the action would work, and then did some storyboards for it. And it's a shame we didn't get to do that because it was pretty epic. But again, it's once the production started shutting down with all of its troubles, and they started the first things that they do are take away all the really expensive stuff. Because they're going to decide they're not going to spend any more money on it because this is just going to be one of those things they're going to look forward to burying as quickly as possible.
Wow.
And it's unfortunate that it got more and more that way as the production went on because, again, initially, and it's that pattern again, maybe it's me. I've just realized I'm the fucking curse. But yeah, early on it was such a big, hopeful, energetic, experience with something that looked like it was going to be a lot of fun as an end product, and it just ultimately never ended up being that way, which is a shame because the plans for Galactus in the second film were pretty awesome.
Wow.
So, yeah,
I feel for you, and I honestly feel for Josh Trank because I really loved Chronicle.
Yes,
and that's the thing, man. It's like, no, this guy gets nerd culture and knows how to tell a good story. And I do feel bad that, I hope that he is able to crawl out of the rubble of Fantastic Four and, kind of get something new going. I have no idea what he's doing currently.
He's just written and directed that Capone movie with Tom Hardy.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, that's great.
Yes, it's about Al Capone when he comes out of prison in his final years.
Oh my God! Yeah, when he's all syphilised out and kind of crazy too.
Yeah, that's the one.
Oh my God! Interesting. Yeah. Oh, I had no idea that was being made. I just being a Chicago guy, know my Capone story and everything, and yeah, that is ambitious, and man, especially for Hardy to play that kind of role.
I know. I think
that sounds great.
I think there's quite a bit of heavy makeup for him on it because of the syphilis is amongst other things, and the age too. But
sure.
But yeah, it's
I hope it works.
Yeah, Josh is doing a Capone story is one of Josh's ambitions. It's a shame that it all went so south because the plans they were cooking up for the Boba Fett movie were I probably shouldn't even be talking about that. But anyway.
That's right. No, I do remember that he was involved with Star Trek movies and stuff. Yes.
So the Boba Fett movie was going to be his next film after Fantastic Four, and then he wanted to do. Hopefully, there would have been a Fantastic Four 2, which was going to be the big Galactus story, and the plans for that were also then going to merge with the X-Men movies. They're going to do a Fantastic Four X-Men movie.
Made sense, sure. Well, they had all the licenses. Why not?
Yeah, well,
interesting. Yeah. Well, and I've heard the same thing about. The CW network, the American television network that does all the DC superhero stuff, the CW, one of its principal media partners is this company called Tribune Media. They've divested from the CW since, but their president at a programming meeting is like, "What's with all the superhero shit? Do we really care about this?" And, the minority opinion, and he's not with the company anymore. But, yeah, there's always somebody that just doesn't get it. That Decca Records executive that gets the Beatles demo and is like, the guitars are on the way out. Thanks anyway. Not interested.
Yeah.
So, this is our world, man, where executives get in the way of great creatives. But, it's interesting, and I know, like you said, you want to get back to your creator-owned stuff. I do appreciate the democratization of the technology to make this stuff because now, and also the bigger platforms and all the different platforms out there as far as TV and film, because now I think it is getting easier for creatives to kind of get their vision the way they want it to be.
Well, again, the Netflix and Amazon platforms, it's changing the way we all view a lot of things. And TV, as much as I love the big budgets of the movies, I love the long-form storytelling of TV shows.
Absolutely.
Because movies end up becoming the Reader's Digest version of the story.
Agreed. Yes.
But you get game changers like The Wire, and you get game changers like The Sopranos, and then Breaking Bad and Dexter, and obviously Game of Thrones too, which is the most expensive show ever made. And also, shows like The Crown on Netflix, which doesn't look like it should be expensive, but is recreating all of that period stuff.
Oh God, yes.
I adore that too, but that's my kind of storytelling. I know it doesn't sound like it's big scale, but it is. It's big scale storytelling still. I mean, Game of Thrones is obviously epic, yes, but all that other stuff is still big scale because it's the large world you're building. You have a core group of characters and a large world they're in, and it is in its own way epic storytelling.
Absolutely. Oh God, The Sopranos is a classic example. You have this great lead story of Gandolfini and his family, but then as the seasons progress, you can spend one episode, and it's one of the best ones with Paulie Walnuts and Christopher in the car, without out of gas in the woods and stuff, and
that was great.
Just them screaming at each other for 40 minutes, and it's fantastic.
It is.
So.
But that's because
absolutely, man.
You couldn't have done that as a scene in a movie. It wouldn't have been interesting. But because it's you've spent time over years getting to know these characters, the payoff of giving you more of them is worth it.
No, I agree, and it's that is where TV and comics come together, and I'm glad that not only at DC and Marvel, but also in a lot of these Image projects, some of these creators will really tell a great epic long story and can get into some of these side characters for a couple issues. Jason Aaron and R.M. Guerra did it with Scalped, and Fraction and Chaykin did it with Satellite Sam.
It's interesting with that TV stuff though, because I suppose you can trace that TV, the stuff we all love, right back to Buffy.
Sure.
Because nobody was doing genre TV like that before Joss did it.
You're right about that. No, you're absolutely right about that. And I do. I came to Buffy and Angel late. I came to Angel first because one of my radio bosses is like, I really think you'd like Angel. And he's like, well, now that you like Angel, you got to watch Buffy. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. So I did.
Yeah.
Because as we get older, how much investment can we make in teenage, angst? I mean, I appreciate it, but it's like, all right, that was 30 years ago. My face cleared up since then. I've moved on. But
when it must have been well into when Angel was on, but when my wife was pregnant with our third child, which is 16 years ago, I suppose now.
Okay.
But I'd been watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, and she's like, "What is this? It's nerd stuff. It's geeky stuff. And I said, look, watch an episode with me, and this was on video then. This wasn't even DVD.
Okay.
So I put some of it on, and she's like, yeah, this is all right, and so I went off, I had an office out of the house then, so I went off to work that morning, and I came back, and she was still sitting in our bedroom, watching Buffy. I said, well, you watched another couple of episodes? She says, no, I'm on season 2 now. And next day it was like season 3. I was like, so basically for about 5 weeks you just watched all of Buffy and Angel, non-stop. So help her through
stuff, man. And also think of all those writers now of Buffy and Angel that are show running. Steve DeKnight and Tim Minear and Mari Noxon and all of these
Drew
people.
Goddard.
Who else?
Drew Goddard.
Drew Goddard, of course, absolutely. Great stuff, absolutely, and great writers. And he assembled an amazing team, and they've gone off to create amazing television. It's true, man. It's and they do. They say it's the second golden age of TV. It absolutely is.
Well, Joss has gone back to it now as well. Joss has gone back to they just announced that new drama is going to make Victorian set supernatural female-led drama. I
didn't hear. I hadn't heard that.
I think they only announced the title and the concept for it. I know I was emailing him the other day because he's coming over because they're going to shoot over here. So, I get to hang out, I guess, which will be cool.
Oh, man.
I've known Joss for years. We've been friends for 15 years now. So,
wow. That's
and again,
great. I'd love to get him on the show sometime. He's amazing, and I love his work, and I'm a long fan. I met him briefly in San Diego. I put out a small transcribed bit of interviews that I had done for Word Balloon within my first year, and they were handing them out at the Century Guild Art Gallery booth at San Diego, which is always a beautiful booth of like great old Klimt prints and turn of the century pop art and stuff, really interesting stuff. And Whedon was there. And I recognized him right away, and I handed him one, and he saw that Loeb was on the cover, and I forget who else, and he's like, hey, I know a bunch of these guys. And I said, I know. That's why I was hoping you'd check it out. And for a while, we went back and forth, and I had hoped to get him on, but things just didn't work out. So, I'm sure he's gone through several assistants since then. But no, longtime fan, and yeah, man, and truly, even Buffy, like you said, it's just strong writing and it's strong characters, and the Zeppo. When they focus on Xander and Cordelia says that horrible thing to him, and all those episodes when Anya gets her solo moment in Buffy, and same thing in Angel with Fred and Cordelia and all those great characters. Wesley,
but there's the silent episode as well,
yes,
which is, and the musical episode,
absolutely,
because Joss is a huge fan of musicals, so
and he's done it better. Frankly, I've appreciated that Supergirl and that the kids from Supergirl and the Flash that used to be on Glee wanted to kind of do the same thing. It really wasn't. It really was more of a karaoke time of, hey, let's just sing a bunch of pop hits. And I'm like, no, man, the cleverness of Once Again, or how Once More with Feeling, is that they integrated the songs into the story.
Yeah.
And it was this brilliant, real musical. They, I know it's been performed at various conventions and stuff, but that episode really could be its own little Broadway production.
Oh, I think Joss has always wanted to make a big scale. I know Dr. Horrible was a musical.
Dr. Horrible, absolutely.
But,
yes.
But he would love to make a big scale, full on movie musical. So he never got around to it for some reason. I know he's talked to Stephen Sondheim about stuff.
Wow.
So interesting guy. Yeah.
Crazy stuff, man. Would you ever want to do any of the CW? DC hero shows in any way, either design or writing or anything like that?
I maybe. It is time. And honestly, if I'd rather turn, I suppose, my time to something original that's mine tgoing
sure.
Because again, it's just like in comics. There's a production schedule. There's you're going to have to live by, and there's a production process that you're going to have to work to as well. And again, with those designers, they're a rapid turnaround, very, very efficient shop, because they all know each other, and there's nobody throwing wrenches into the mix by chucking in stuff they can't afford to do and wasting everybody's time. So I think I'm probably better off creating stuff for comics. Or new material from scratch, honestly. And that's probably where my interest is, because I'm certainly not short of ideas and stories. And I think that's what I want to spend my time doing, is telling them. And that doesn't mean not doing DC stuff, because I've got bags of DC stuff I want to do. Because that's what I grew up reading, DC. I didn't even know Marvel existed till I was virtually a professional. I was a professional from age 16, so it was only in my teens when I first saw the end of Walt Simonson's Thor stuff, and it was the last two issues of Miller and Mazzucchelli's Daredevil story.
Oh, sure.
Born Again. They were the first Marvel comics I read, because they were, the small town where I was growing up, we had the cinema, and right next door to the cinema was a newsagent's, and every month in that newsagent's from the middle 1970s, when I first started going in there, they'd just get a pile of outdated, several months of out. They're all the same months, but they were all 3 months out of date, because comics used to come over as ballast on ships.
I love that story.
And
it's amazing.
And they would go to a central news agency distribution thing, and they'd just be sent out random piles of these. So some towns only got Marvels, some towns only got DC comics. And this one place in the town that sold it just sold this pile. It was like I remember it being something like a foot high pile of comics every month, and I was obviously the only one buying them. So I'd go in there, and I remember it going to see Superman, then going next door, and I wouldn't buy any sweets in the cinema or any drinks, because I'd save my money so I could go next door and buy a few more comics that month. And so I think that's actually an interesting way of looking at it, though, because I think that's why cinema and comics are so combined in how I choose to work, because I was as much a fan of film as I was of comics, and and the two were literally next door to each other. Literally around the corner from my house was the cinema and the newsagent that sold the comics, and the two in memory are constantly combined. So, you'd have the choice of you're going to see the film, but you'd have money for sweets and for a drink, but I'd rather spend that on the comics. And then I'd have the cinema experience, then I'd go home and read the comics and get lost in those and read and reread them. And then I'd save up more pocket money to go to the cinema the following week. And it's just, I think those two in combination are why film and comic, I don't differentiate necessarily between the two in visual approach, and maybe where there's a cinematic lean to the artwork is because I've always seen the two. I've seen Superman on screen when I was reading him in the comics, and that was when it all formed in my head about, this is what I want to do for a living.
I understand, man, and I always appreciate, forgive the generalization, but hearing British people, first of all, discover comics as they did. The fact that they were coming over as you say, ballast. I mean, so literally, like dead weight, that becomes found art, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
And also, what characters you all find interesting? Because I always know there's a C or D level DC or Marvel character that in the right British hands, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, I know you never thought about Robbie Reed, Dial H for Hero this way, but ... And it's like, oh my God, this is fantastic. And also, as an older reader myself, I just love a lot of. I think we're about 5 years apart. I think in years, and I'm 53. And
I'm 40.
So it's a lot of these. It's a lot of again these side characters, Dr. 13, and some of these others that it's like, oh, that's what you guys find interesting. That's amazing, and characters that I hadn't thought of in decades. And it's like, oh God, there they are, and totally fleshed out.
Oh well, given free reign, I would love to do a massive. Western story with all the DC Western characters.
Oh, that'd be great.
The Jonah Hex and Batlash and all of those, all of them. Scalp
Cinnamon.
Hunter, Cinnamon, Scalp Hunter, all that. I mean, I know the story. I just really what I need to do is put the time down because I think Dan's open to it. As a concept because. Again, it's one of those things. I suppose if you've got the right story and the right creative team, and I would like to write it and have Garcia Lopez pencil it and Kevin Nolan ink it. That would be my dream. I mean, I would love to do it myself, but I would rather they did it because I know Garcia Lopez adores westerns and put Kevin on him, and he's just it's wonderful. So, ideally, I'd like to do this, and again, you might just get a hell of a short-lived but hell of a product out of that, a really nice hardcover that you could be proud of for the rest of your life because but again for me it's those are the characters that were because as a kid I'd work my way through the pile. I'd always want the Supermans and anything drawn by Garcia Lopez, all the Batmans. You work your way through a pile, and by the end of the month the only comics left were the Scalp Hunters and the Jonah Hexes and then I'd buy them and I'd enjoy them just as much because it was a comic and it was escapism and it was a whole different world and I loved the westerns because I love western movies too. My dad loved westerns, so I was always happy watching really old westerns, the Gary Cooper stuff on TV. I loved the weekends and the holidays because all the old movies were on. Everything, we didn't have a lot of children's TV back then. We had 3 TV stations and there was 2 hours of kids' TV programs every evening between 4 and 6, and that was it.
I hear you. Yeah.
And so what you watched with the other stuff. You watched the movies that your parents watched, and they weren't made for children. So no other TV shows. So you kind of your education in drama was very different because it wasn't based on fantasy. It was based on melodrama and personal drama, or it was westerns and the heroes, heroic fiction, whether it's westerns. Barbarian fantasy, historical fantasy, or historical fiction, or historical drama, or superheroes. It's still heroic fiction. The rules are still the same. The dressing's different. That's where I learned my storytelling trade, really, off all those old movies. I loved that stuff, the old Western movies. Still do. Still love watching.
Yeah, me too, man. No, I'm a huge old Western fan. Also a big war film, but also war comics fan. Yeah. And really going back, I'm looking at my I was able to purchase a Tony DeZuniga Jonah Hex before he passed away, and it's framed on my wall. Cool. But a lot of those.
He's actually.
What's that?
He is one of the kind of completely unknown influences on my work. I've adored his work since I was a kid.
Interesting.
Just love
Very interesting.
I know, but it's one of those. He's one of those guys that often gets overlooked, especially because he often had to do rush job ink jobs. When you look at his own work, especially his pencils and his own full art, it's his stuff's wonderful.
Yes,
and the way
absolutely.
the way he would use cross hatching. I loved all those the Filipino guys as well, like
Yes.
Mr. Redondo and Alfredo Alcala, who was
Yes.
trying to do in black and white what Leyendecker was doing with paint, which is an interesting thing. But I loved their work, and that's all fed into how I render stuff too. Because I think my inking style these days is probably even more European or more Filipino than it is American.
Interesting.
It's all cross hatching and textures, and that's not generally speaking something that's been traditional in American comics, which because of their printing processes necessitated often having very simple line work.
Understood and agree. And also, as I've learned more about those Filipino artists, they learned how to draw looking at actual comic panels, not realizing that the original art was so much bigger, the production art.
Yeah.
And yet they learned how to draw that way in such detail, in such small scale.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. And I have tremendous appreciation for the Filipino comic movement. And those guys are, like you said, Akala and Nestor Redondo and Tony and everything, just amazing artists.
Actually, funny, that story about the sizing is kind of the reverse of another artist I like, because there's a French artist called Paul Gillon. I think he's died now because he was in his 90s. But his back catalogue's breathtakingly good. I mean, his work, he did a huge series of science fiction graphic albums in France. And some of it was probably reprinted in the 60s and 70s in heavy metal, I think, actually.
Okay.
Metal Hurlant. And actually,
yes, it did.
And actually, some of it was reprinted, I know, in the Warren magazines, like Rook and
Creepy and Eerie.
Freaky and Eerie. Yeah, some of it was reprinted in that, if I remember rightly. But Paul Gillon, he's got these incredibly expressive brush strokes. His science fiction work is almost, as wonderfully imaginative and detailed as anything you've seen in Star Wars, and it was a decade earlier. But I discovered that his pages are absolutely enormous. He draws huge. Like a page of his artwork is about the size of a door. And apparently what happened was that when he was young and starting out in France, he was really a big fan of the Flash Gordon, the Alex Raymond Flash Gordon Sunday page.
Sure.
And he was curious about American comics because he didn't know how they drew, what size they drew them at. And he understood that this had been in the 1950s and 1960s. That he understood that he was told that Americans draw twice up from print. So that's what he did. He got, but the thing is, the Flash Gordon Sunday pages were being printed on what they call, a broadsheet newspaper.
Yes.
So when he scaled that up by twice, it was pretty much the size of a bedroom door. So that's how big he drew. But he didn't realize that, American comics, of course, are much smaller than that. And, twice up is what is it, about 15 odd by something or other. But anyway, I've wanted to get hold of one of his, I've seen them, but I haven't actually bought one, but I would love to get hold of one of these things. But I don't even have the wall space to put it anywhere because it would be, it's insanely vast. And the thing was, despite how big he was drawing, he was incredibly quick, apparently. And that's always amazed me when you get people like him and Joe Kubert who can just turn out, exquisite work at a speed that defies understanding.
Completely agree. I wanted to ask, given that you are working on Hawkman, had you ever met Kubert?
I didn't meet him. I've always said to Andy and Adam that that's my greatest regret is that I never said yes to going to the school when I was out there once.
Yeah.
I wished I had, because it was only a couple of years after that Joe passed away, and they said that he was very impressed by my work, which just made my day for, many days. In fact, I've loved his work since I was a kid. But I've only,
too, man.
as I've learned more, I've grown to appreciate his work more. And I've pretty much got. Well, I've got a huge amount of it now, and even some of the much older stuff. But those artist editions I've got as well.
That's great.
The Tor one especially, which is even bigger than the normal artist editions, because it was drawn for bigger print size. When he did that Tor stuff, when was that? It was the 90s, I think. There was a series, but it was done as sort of a much larger print format. So of course he drew the pages bigger. So because they're printing them at the size he drew the pages, the artist edition is even bigger than the normal artist editions.
Interesting. I didn't realize that. Yeah,
it's immense. It's lying on top of the shelves because I just can't put it anywhere.
Sure.
But it's just, I still pull it down regularly and look through it. And it's always inspiring. Every single. I just adore the guy's work, and
absolutely.
When you hear that he drew a page of Tarzan in 15 minutes, it shouldn't be allowed.
I hear you, man. No, he was incredible, and I missed my opportunity to have him on Word Balloon. And Jimmy Palmiotti was kind enough to introduce us at a C2E2 convention, and he was great. And I just loved that he in principle agreed to coming on, but then passed away a few months later. But then I just loved that he was still working literally up until the end, and I loved that DC was doing that Joe Kubert anthology series.
Yeah,
and it was like, oh, that's so right, and it just really, it was like, man, the guy still has it. And, all those great graphic novels he did in the last few years of his life are so powerful and so great stories and great storytelling. And, of course, Azzarello, I had to ask him about doing that Sergeant Rock with him and what that was like, Oh, no, he was just a genius. And a guy that was there from the beginning, 13 years old, doing blacks for Will Eisner's studio when he's a kid.
I'm working in comics pretty much for as long as comics have been around. I know. It's amazing. The fact that he never, ever lost it either. He was still as good at the end as he had been for the last, I fell for his stuff in the 70s, but, sure. I know that the Hawkman stuff was the 60s. But, it was every bit as good as he ever was, right down to the last stuff he ever drew. Andy and Adam were always telling me stories, actually, about how fast he was, and I'm sure they must have told you some of them.
I haven't had Adam and Andy on yet, and I keep hoping to, and I got to bug DC about making that happen. Or whatever.
I'll tell you a couple of quick ones that they told me, because it just always inspires me, and I love to repeat these. And I apologize to both of them for repeating these, and any mistakes I might make in the narrative, I'll put entirely down to just faulty memory on my part. But Adam, about the time I was doing Ultimate X-Men with Mark. And there was a sequence they were doing with Nick Fury in a war setting. So the idea was Adam penciled those, and then Joe was going to ink them. I think it was about 8 pages, the sequence in the end on that issue. So Adam said it took him 2 weeks to pencil them, and then he dropped them on his dad's desk. And his dad said, he'd get to them later. And so they went off and they did their work for the day, and Joe met up with them in the evening for a beer, and Adam said, did you how did you find them? Have you done anything on them? He said, yeah, I finished them this afternoon. He said, wait, 8 pages, you've done all of them? He said, yeah, it wasn't any trouble. And then Adam thought of me and said, hang on a minute, you were teaching classes? He said, yeah, I did them in the break. And then Andy told me to follow that one. Andy said, I think that was good. He said, so he's doing I think it might have been a Batman cover, but he was doing a cover anyway that Joe was going to ink. So Andy penciled the cover, and he went to drop it on his dad's desk to leave it for him. His dad wasn't in the office. So he left it on his dad's drawing board with a note. And then he said, so his desk, he was on like the second floor of the building. And Andy said his studio was in the basement. So he said he stopped off to make some coffee, walked down the stairs to the basement to sit at his desk, realized he'd run out of paper. So he went back up the stairs to his dad's office to steal some paper from his dad's office. And the cover was sitting Joe still wasn't there, but the cover was sitting on his desk finished. I mean, that's almost the level of mythology now, isn't it? He wasn't even there. He never even saw his dad, but the cover just suddenly got miraculously inked.
Jesus. Well, again, confidence in his abilities, doesn't let distraction get in his way. And obviously, that was and I'm sure teaching only reinforced his skill. And it's a great excuse to, as he's, I'm sure, working on a book, using that and showing his process to explain process to his students. I have to imagine, again, eventually when I do talk to Adam and Andy, I hope to hear those kinds of stories, because it would only make sense that he was probably using his own work as he was doing it, saying, okay, this is what I'm doing with my, and I can't think of a current, Yosef or one of those stories, that he made in those last years. So, genius, man.
Absolutely towering talent, and great body of work. It's amazing, and as I said, it's always inspiring.
Indeed.
And the fact that he had that confidence, and I love the fact that he always said that he felt like he retired on the second day of the job because it was just fun all the time after. I mean, there's always you read in interviews that he was still pulling the midnight oil on this job or working all night on the other, and all the stuff that goes with the territory sometimes when you're working to deadlines and there's just no way to fit it in unless you do it that way. And it happens to all of us, but I love the fact that it still didn't spoil the joy for him, and the fact that I find that inspiring just as much as his drawing. I find his attitude to his work completely inspiring.
Agreed. No, an amazing guy, dude. You've been so kind with your time. I feel like we should wrap just to give you a break and also rest your voice. But truly, a great conversation. And please, when they make the announcement for the new project, come back.
Absolutely.
And because there's more to talk about. And you were kind to really focus on your American work, but I know you obviously had a few years, I'm assuming, at some of the other British publishers before you broke into the American market. So actually, I want to hear about that.
Well, there's not a lot to hear. Honestly, there's not that much to hear because the work was shit, honestly. I felt like I've had a career that spans 30 years, but it took me, as I said, with authority, 12 years to become an overnight success. And most of the work before that was me just not knowing what the hell I was doing at all. So, I mean, I'm happy to talk about it, and there are anecdotes there, but really, that was the authority was about the first. Well, that and the Stormwatch, I suppose, a little bit, but the authority was the first time it really kind of came together for me, and I actually knew I seemed to know what I was doing. Anyway, it was still very experimental because it was the first time I got to really be me, I think, as well. And the first time I really stopped swiping from other people or trying to be other people. So, but the 12 years before that is just a mess of half-baked work and very bad, very, very bad stuff. I look at that stuff. I hate it, honestly. I think I've burnt almost every copy that I can get my hands on to try and wipe it from existence. But yeah, I'm happy to talk to you anytime, John. So
Okay, that's great, man. Because and believe me, I know I feel that way about my early radio years as well. And I'm glad that I didn't hang on to air checks. But then again, I do have great stories and great encounters as far as interviews and people that happen to wander. It was a sports talk station, as I said, but we'd have a lot of celebrities come in as well. So it was a good time. And yeah, exactly. I cringe thinking about, listening to myself from that period. But by the same token, there's always good stories. So no, excellent, man. Hey, again, thank you. As a long admirer of your work, it's such a thrill to have you on the show, and really a great, very flattering that you're aware of what I do.
Oh, I listen to this stuff all the time. So I won't be listening to this one because I hate to hear myself recording. But besides which, I already know what I've said, so it won't be
exactly. We've already done it. That's okay. Yeah, you don't have to re-listen.
But I do listen to the others, so I'm glad to be part of it.
Oh, it's very kind, Brian. I truly appreciate that, and yes, we will touch base. I'll let you rest for the rest of the year, but yeah, come 2019, you'll come back and give us new stories.
Absolutely, love to.
Great conversation with Bryan Hitch. Really excited to share it with you on Word Balloon, and he had so much fun. He's like, "Can we do this again?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's got a lot more to talk about, man. Are you kidding me? So we'll give him a few months break, but I would expect early 2019 we'll be talking to Bryan Hitch, if not sooner, depending on how these announcements go that he's got coming from D.C. Very interesting stuff. Very excited to hear about them. Bryan Hitch on today's Word Balloon. Hope you enjoyed it. It was brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. As always, League, thank you very much for your support. Please continue to help me out if you can. Word Balloon is free. It'll always be free. I know I always say that, but I truly mean it because I still want to gather a big audience. Like I said, if you can spare $1 a month to subscribe to Word Balloon, that's terrific. I've been giving advance notice on some interviews that become episodes for the patrons at Patreon, and I intend to do some more as well. I'm getting schooled by the Patreon people of how best to serve you in that capacity. And again, I can't thank you enough because you really are helping me get through these months with great content and doing a lot more for you on Word Balloon. League of Word Balloon listeners via Patreon. So go to patreon.com/wordballoon or click on the Patreon ad at wordballoon.com. Word Balloon is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics, shaking things up now at your local comic store. Great series like Hot Lunch Special from Elliot Real and Jorge Fornes. Also books like Beyonders by Paul Jenkins and Wesley St. Clair. And an upcoming Word Balloon guest, the Lollipop Kids, will be talking to Adam Glass. Adam and Adrian are doing the writing. Diego Yapur is doing the art, and Sal Cipriano is doing the lettering. Pretty neat story about kids discovering old world immigrant monsters that were brought over the boat and came through Ellis Island without us knowing it and are now dwelling in New York City. That's the Lollipop Kids. There are a ton of amazing writers and artists that you already know doing books at Aftershock Comics. Check it out. Look for full story descriptions, preview pages, and most importantly, the diamond codes on these books to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. Thanks again for listening. I hope to see you at New York Comic Con. I have no panels. I don't have a table. I'm going to be wandering, just like you guys and women, going to panels, seeing my favorite art people at their tables, both writers and artists. I will be hanging out at Art and Franco's Aw Yeah table and their row of creators because they're my buddies and they always have a chair for me to sit down. And I always appreciate that. But I really can't wait, man. I'm very excited. I can't believe we're only 2 weeks away from New York Comic Con. And can't wait to see you, shake your hand, and thank you for your support by listening to Word Balloon. As I always say, if you really want to help out Word Balloon, a couple things you can do. First of all, support our sponsors, but also tell people about Word Balloon. Tell people you like it. Word Balloon is at Blog Talk Radio, and Blog Talk is about to join the Spreaker platform. And that's great because that's only going to expand Word Balloon. It's going to be easier for me to post things to YouTube, to SoundCloud. I've kind of toyed with SoundCloud in the past, but you'll be getting more regular SoundCloud posts of shows as well. But spread the word. Let people know that you're enjoying these conversations, and if they're into comics, they may as well. Thanks again. If you have questions or comments about the show, reach me via email, john@wordballoon.com. Follow me on Twitter, @JohnWordBalloon, or under my name, John Suntress, and the Word Balloon Network on Facebook. Instagram, I'm there under Word Balloon. And what else can I say? More great conversation to come in the days ahead. We will not be slowing down here in September. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2018.